Edison obtained his veterinary medicine degree in Brazil. You might want to turn that off.
Yep.
Okay. In Brazil in 2015 and worked as a swine veterinary practitioner in the Brazilian swine industry for 4 years. In 2019, he moved to the U.S. to pursue a master's in veterinary medicine at Iowa State University. He earned his PhD in 2023 from the same university, specializing in developing automated models to analyze swine data for better decision making. Currently, Edison is an assistant professor in the Department of Animal Science at Iowa State, focusing on data integration and machine learning to help producers improve their practices.
Can you guys hear me well? Yep. So hi everyone. Pleasure for me to be here. I'd like to first of all thank the organizing committee of the Lion Swine Day for inviting me. And today, like I mentioned, I'm going to present to you guys some of the work that we have been doing here at the Department of Animal Science. So I started at the Department of Animal Science last July, but I've been working on this data integration process for a couple of years for now. So some outline of today's presentation, we're going to cover in terms of data usage, how the data is being applied today in the swine industry, but starting with some of the evolution over the years. Where are we today? What are the next steps? How do we get there to the next steps? And when we get there, then what? What can we do, right, in terms of data? So I think this is a common scenario, right? If we talk about commercial sow farms and nursery and finishing sites, this is still some reality, especially in other countries with feeder electronic system, individual sow feeding electronic systems that simplify a lot of these, and now data is being collected. But still, that's part of the reality. We still have a lot of records information being recorded manually in the farm, in the paper, and then that information becomes a bunch of information, a bunch of papers that usually that will be translated to the computer. But in the past, before that, the development of those softwares, people were looking at those papers with records and trying to understand. So that doesn't make sense, right? So pretty much what we evolved from there is putting all that information back into a computer, and that system is prepared to simplify and summarize that information. Kind of some involvements on data collection, right? So from papers to notepads, today with cell phones or tablets. So if you have Wi-Fi and internet on your farm, that simplifies the process of collecting the data and most importantly, storing that data automatically into a database, right? So I would say that's kind of what's the scenario today that we have. Kind of stole this picture from Dr. Dale Ponso. I really like he posted that on LinkedIn. But so basically that would be a lot of information recorded in papers. Some farms, they would have a lot of technology, so collecting everything into tablets, but still there are a lot of papers. But everybody is storing that information into the computer, into a software, and that software will provide some data description or descriptive statistics of what's happening in the farm, right? Overall, not only looking at individual farm, but how the swine industry is using that information, right? So, for example, this report from Park Chekhov that would summarize data from multiple softwares or one single software, a company that have records of farms, and would characterize, for example, what are the top 10, the 50%, and the bottom 10 in terms of some major KPIs. So very interesting here, but still an opportunity for us as an industry to move from that descriptive statistics and apply something better. And we have the data for doing that. So that's kind of how I would say that we are using the data today in the industry. A lot of descriptive statistics, right? So for example, these charts here, they would represent sow body condition score, a screenshot, let's say a snapshot of a farm in 4 different gestation phases here, as you guys can see. So they would see that they don't have a lot of thin sows in this farm, but they would have 35 to 40% of fat sows based on caliper. And descriptive statistics here, understanding that, okay, our issue is with fat cells, not thin, so we have to change that. And moving from that will be some analysis based on pivot tables. I'm talking here specifically to commercial farms, right? Try to what the routine of the swine industry today. So a lot of pivot tables comparing raw means, and sometimes some regression-based models. But most of the times when I saw that, and when I was back in Brazil in a company there, univariate analysis. Sometimes someone may do multivariable analysis. I would say that this here in the US might be a little bit different because those large companies, they would have a researcher or a statistician working within the company, so they would try to move away from this. But still, regression-based models, and that's it. What we have new compared to what I've seen, what I just talked about until now, some new technologies, like I said, new ways to collect the data, better ways to store the information, but still I would say that we are just improving the office here of this pig, the quality of the papers, computer is new, but still the same approach. That's kind of what I would say that from what I've been seeing with companies, commercial farms, that's the reality. If you talk about multipliers, nucleus farm, that's a different story, right? But I'm focusing here on commercial farms. Some systems, they would provide, this is a system in Brazil, they would provide some alerts based on those averages. So if your farm, it's in Portuguese here, but if your sow mortality is 8.3%, the projected annual death rate, that's green. If it's red, it's bad. So trying to capture that data on a real time, and if it's bad out of the curve, provide an alert and a snapshot, kind of a visualization dashboard. But still, again, here, in my opinion, still stuck on the descriptive statistics. What parameters would be good or bad in this farm? So unfortunately, here in this farm, pretty much is just the sad faces here, just a couple of greens. So like I mentioned, we have a lot better ways to collect the information, right? So for example, with tablets, we would have today some systems to automatically read those tags, those RFID tags of pigs that facilitate the process of recording information from individual pigs, so that becomes more accessible to commercial herds, especially growing pigs, for example. So we know that weighting pigs, it's a lot of work. In fact, I have a student doing that today. So those tags, they help a lot on the process of collecting data. If we could, we all would record birth weight, weaning weight, individual pig. We all know that that information is crucial, but it's hard to do that on a commercial basis because of infrastructure and employee availability. So that's kind of part of becoming more accessible, let's say like that, for those farms. Same thing for sow farms, right? Reading those tags, so that's becoming reality. And what's good here, in my opinion, is that all that information going collect directly to the cloud and are stored, and then we have access. So weighting those pigs individually with those tags, so you don't have to spend a lot of time. Some of the technologies for individual measurements of pigs, I think that's an opportunity here for us. I would say this is also a really good piece of information from those individual sow electronic feeders, so we would have information. We don't have to spend a lot of time on that. But my goal here is that, okay, this is a good information, but we could combine this information with other data streams that we have available in a company and try to characterize the pattern not only on the feed, but water, temperature of the barn, the diagnostics, and as a whole herd aspect. You look individual basis, but you also look at the whole herd. Some of that technology for nursery pigs, there might be an opportunity. Juan mentioned the other computer vision cameras to estimate weight, so you don't have to use those. That's also becoming reality, an opportunity for us. Some systems, for example, that would record information, temperature of the barn, so that's for growing pigs specifically, where individual measurements are even harder than to access compared to sow farms. This could be a good way to monitor that data on a daily basis. So I'm going to show a result here, but there was a study just looking at overall mortality patterns for growing pigs compared and using models to alert when something is out of the, let's say, control. and that most of the times was ahead of a PRRS diagnosis, showing that that's an early indicator of disease. And that's mortality, which is late. So if you look at, for example, temperature of the rooms, something when goes out of the control, like here, and give a spike and an alert for the producer. Some other softwares record information on individual basis, and the farmers in the South Farm here, in this case, you would have information for each litter and follow those pigs and the mortality. So if you are having a spike in mortality in one farrowing room, for example, you are able to capture that information and do an intervention, an early intervention, or do a diagnosis, throw a rope and check for PRRS and others. Information relating to cough, so also an opportunity here, monitoring growing pigs, like I said. So if like this example of monitoring coughing events on a daily basis over the growing phase, it's interesting, but also that could be combined with the mortality, with the water, with the feed, and you create again, like I mentioned in the beginning, that ecosystem that you are monitoring for the pigs. So like examples of temperature, humidity, water intake, feed, nitrogen. So there are many things here, why I'm bringing all these examples to you guys from individual technologies, individual companies, because my goal here at Iowa State University, I'm looking at the ecosystem aspect, is integrating everything. All this data, every time that I look at the different data here, I see the opportunity to combine each other here and for one company or one specific farm. So anyways, can we do better than that? I think that's the next question. My take home for this presentation until this point to you guys is, I think we evolved a lot in the swine industry over the past years, especially in terms of technologies. There are really nice technologies like was showed today in the morning by Matt and Juan also. So there are really cool technologies being developed, but a low-hanging fruit is, okay, using what we have today, let's keep adding the technologies, but let's use what we have today and start focusing on integrating. So making sure that those spaces of information are communicating to each other. And I mentioned this in a couple of presentations before, but to me, that's the best example of people that does that. It's the Formula One concept. So of course you need a driver that it's really good, but that race engineer in front of dashboards that all the information from, for example, sound, temperature, humidity, feed consumption, water, diagnosis, everything is being translated and connected and showing an alert here. And that guy is making decisions on a real time and alerting the actual person driving the car or the manager driving the farm. So that's, I think, where we need to go. So not developing new technologies, is using what's developed by now, and every time that one or someone else develops a new technology, you add that as a piece here in this dashboard. So that's what I call the F1 example, because they would have sensors in the car, of other racers, of the weather, humidity, and everything is an ecosystem, so it's called like the Formula One ecosystem. And how that looks like, in my opinion, for the swine industry, I would think, if you think about a swine production system in the US or anywhere, but that information that we have here is being captured for pretty much everyone today in the industry. We are not talking about collecting new data. So everybody will have their KPIs from sow farm, from nursery, from finishers. Everyone will have health information, disease status for especially PRRS, coronavirus. Diagnostics information, a huge database here available, especially if you get access to the VDLs. They provide that for a system for over 2-3 years, and it's an accessible data, just need to have the agreement with the company, the authorization. Management and environment, so vaccination dates, medication protocols that I'm applying in my sow farm, in my growing pigs. Carcass information, the final end, right, really important, infrastructure, and importantly here, in my opinion here, the PLF technologies, so cameras, sensors, the individual sow electronic feeders, and all of that. When you start to focusing on combining those technologies and after that you apply machine learning models to analyze that integrated data, I think then we were able to move to what we call here this precision swine production, which will be, in my opinion, the closest related to Formula One. Of course, might be hard to get to that Formula One where there real-time communication with the race, with the driver, but we at least built the foundation to do that. So how do we move from this scenario, let's say, where we are just looking, it's pretty fancy, but still not a lot of machine learning or AI behind the scenes helping us out here, and trying to look at two dashboards. So focusing on this decision-making process based on these data-driven alerts. So I mentioned how do we get there? It's integrating all of that, and that's where most of my work for the past years have focused. So it's real-time big data consolidation, which allows interactive analysis of swine data and the application of this concept of precision swine health and productivity management. So this project that we have started basically 5 years ago, started as just an idea with one company and then keep expanded. But today we have in this project here in the United States 5 companies that are our partners, and basically what they do is they provide access to all their data, and of course we have to follow the data agreement and security within here the Iowa State server. And we would build for each of these companies a separate model, individual model, so the data is not connecting between companies here. So we have 5 companies in the States, 1 in Mexico, and 2 in Brazil. And this one here in Brazil is not a swine production system, it's actually a company that provides the software to record information. And they would have 95% of the Brazilian herd in their system. So that project was part of this grant from the USDA, which allowed us to build a foundation for this project. And what we basically do is apply that approach of integrating this process of integration of data, combining diverse, dispersed, and disconnected data streams for each production system. So that algorithm that we built, like you guys are seeing here, it's a process built for each company. Each company will have their software for data, for KPIs in the sow farm, maybe a different one for growing pigs. They send tissues to maybe 1 or 2 VDLs. So everything needs to be customized to that process. And then we do this integration of these connected bases. At the end of the day, we want to look at this master table, which is a data that combines all the information here. And then we go to the fun part, to the good part, right? To do the analysis of that table. This process is probably 85% of the work. It takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of programming, combination with we thankfully have partnerships with stats here, with computer science. But once that's done, we do the analysis, which today we are focused on 3 aspects, with, okay, we have all this data integrated, what are the major drivers of performance? And each company will have a question, right? In my system, I'm focusing on sow mortality. My system is wing to finish mortality. So we drive that question, investigating in that aspect based on what's their priority. Causal effect, which is like the next logical step. Once you identify the drivers of performance in your system, what's the most important driver, and you do a causal effect analysis, which is a better approach than regression models. And then the last one is forecasting, which that's where it gets closest to the Formula One concept, is making decisions or doing interventions now based on models that are predicting something is going to be bad in the future. And that could start from a simple analysis like we did here, a cluster analysis. So the data, in this case, we have 3 variables: sow mortality, farrowing rate, and pre-weaning mortality. Each circle here is a nursery lot. You run a machine learning model, and the model tells you that there, in this whole data set for these 3 variables, we would have 4 clusters. And these clusters, that's how they are plotted, let's say like that. And so we can visually see that that green cluster will be the one with the best faring rate, with the lowest pre-weaning mortality, but also the lowest sow mortality here. So what's the economic impact or the losses, the economic losses in this group compared to the other groups? So internal benchmarking here based on this machine learning. This is just a regression model that we did. Actually, this was the work that's pretty much started everything. When we integrated birth to market data from one company, this was for IoSelect Farms, and they allowed us, they are partners in this paper, and they have been presenting this also. So 68% of the variation on mortality, win to finish mortality here, as you guys can see on the y-axis, was explained by this multivariable model. And this model, when we look at the variables in the model, I would say 90% of the variables here are sow farm related variables. And we integrated, when we did this analysis for the model selection, we had variables from the nursery and the finisher phase. So in this case, sow farm was really driving their downstream performance, and that may vary depending on system, right? But in this case, so at least you know what's the impact of those factors in your system under your reality. Moving from there, this is another paper that we had done with a different company, but their question was different. It was E. coli. So E. coli was a big deal for them in nursery pigs. So what was the impact of E. coli in my system? So for this one, we don't use regression model. We use what we call the causal models, where we are controlling for PRRS, PD, weaning age, stocking density, and other diseases, lateral introduction of diseases throughout the growing phase. And based on these variables here, the confounders, each circle here is a group, is a batch of pigs. The model will give a propensity score that we call. What's the likelihood of classified as a nursery, a E. coli break or not break if I'm PRRS epidemic, PD epidemic, low weaning age, high stocking density, and I have lateral diseases. So that's kind of how it works. Analogy to that is if you are comparing, for example, if you have lung cancer or not, what's the likelihood of having lung cancer just by being, for example, male, above the expected weight, so you're fat, you're not exercising, you are drinking beer, you're smoking, the likelihood of having lung cancer will be much higher than if you are female, you work out, you don't drink. So that's basically what the model does here for E. coli controlling for those factors. And the difference in nursery mortality was of 2.27% using this model. Yeah, and compare those batches. So each circle here will have a propensity score. So we'll try to measure the delta with similar pairs. So we'll compare this guy with this guy. So not this group with this one. Another model that we did, this was done by Kelly from Brazil, when she was a visiting scholar here with us, a multivariable analysis, and one of the variables from this multivariable model that was important for the system, for pre-weaning mortality in this case, was rotavirus. And she saw that groups that had both rotavirus vaccination and rotavirus feedback, both of them, both the strategies caused that those groups had were associated with a lower pre-weaning mortality downstream compared to the other groups. So they were pretty much the same here, but combination of rotavirus feedback and vaccination were associated with a lower pre-weaning mortality. This was an analysis for mycoplasma in one system, where mixed group here will be the combination of both status, but we can see that the endemic groups for mycoplasma, that means groups that are weaned from sow farms with endemic status compared to groups weaned from sow farms that are negative for mycoplasma, there's a difference here on wean to finish mortality. And that actually helped this company to, based on this controlling for other variables here, like I mentioned, by other confounders, that actually helped this company to move to more mycoplasma negative herds. So I think when we did this analysis, they had 50% of their herds were either naive or endemic, and today 80% are negative, and this was 2 years ago. Also looking at distribution of data, so what's the winning age of my batch? My winning age is 20 days, my winning age is 21 days. But what's the winning age distribution, right? So this is collecting liter data, and if you look at the liter data, we would have, I don't know, 145,000 liters in this data, which an average of 21 days, standard deviation of 2.93. So you would have some liters with the 11 days, 14, the 18 days. But overall, let's say it will be good in this system. It's above the 21, but you have these groups here that may represent a problem. So how do you translate that data and you combine the liter data into the actual group data, right? So what we did here is this information, we have actually the 145,000 liters, they were connected with the downstream 349 nursery groups, so not the weaned batch. So that 2143 days for 145,000 liters connected to the 349 nursery groups. And that average would change a little bit because it's how the groups are being made, let's say like that, being selected. And here on the x-axis is the proportion of liters below 18 days of age within each nursery group. So you would have groups with 4% of the liters that filled that nursery site had less than 18 days of age, but some groups, 44% of the whole batch filling up that nursery site was below 18 days of age. So if you look at this data, it doesn't look like you have a lot of 18 days, but you may have they may be concentrated for a couple of nursery groups, and that can cause a problem. Another example here from Anapol in this case here on how to analyze that data, multivariable models. So here is just comparing the impact of batch farrowing compared to the weekly flow, and she was comparing how soon the farms reach stability for PRRS, comparing batch farrow to weekly flow, and she saw here that for the red ones, they take about 25 weeks longer to reach stability for PRRS compared to when you are batch farrowing. And that's kind of expected, right? If you're in a batch farrow in terms of cleaning and cross-fostering and MacRebel, all those things that we focus on trying to reach stability sooner, but it's actually putting a number for the system. This is a work that Gustavo Silva at the VetMed did, applying machine learning, and I think it's an important example to bring here, where he basically built a survey with multiple biosecurity questions for sow farms, and they had to answer all those questions, biosecurity related. And based on those questions, he created with machine learning, what's the score for each sow farm of a score of biosecurity. So 1 will be, let's say in this case, a very bad score, and 0, it is a very good score, because in this case 1 means 100% probability of having a problem related to biosecurity. And we can basically see that. So then on the y-axis, the ones that are the higher probability of having some problems, some outbreaks due to biosecurity information, they really had most of the breaks. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 outbreaks. And those farms that, based on the biosecurity questions, their risk was low, they rarely had more than 2 breaks here. This was the work that I mentioned before, monitoring growing lots. So this is the weeks post placement, and Mafalda, she basically, daily mortalities created a pattern for one company. We're using groups that, let's say, are the optimal in terms of win to finish mortality, and this is the reference group for that company in terms of what's the expected weekly mortality in my system. And with that model, she can now plot ongoing groups, and whenever one group goes out of the curve, don't follow the pattern, that generates an alert, and she basically compared those data alerts with the actual veterinarian, let's say, diagnosis that something was going on, and she could see that it was most of the times happening before the actual outbreak confirmation. And this is a work that we did similar to what Gustavo did with the biosecurity questions, but in this case I used productivity information to create a score, a wing quality score. And 10 means, in this case, the red groups are all groups with nursery mortality above 5%. You guys can see that they are all above here, and the green ones are below. And basically the machine learning model is telling us that given these factors here, when you are, for example, a very good weaning age, low pre-weaning mortality, optimal stocking density, you don't have PERS, you don't have PD, you don't have Michael, your likelihood of having an outbreak, not having an outbreak, is 100%, so it's a score 10. And when that's 0, you also, it's the opposite. And we can really see that trend here. So those groups, they were predicted to be score 8 to 10 here. Each circle here is a nursery group. We can see that they were clustered here on this part below the 5% nursery mortality. So we all know that wing quality is important, but here is using machine learning to actually create a score for each batch of pigs, and we could use that later for prediction. This is the actual prediction model. So in this publication, we basically use 3 years of data to train machine learning models, and not, in this case, not predict as high or low, but also what's the actual number of mortality that my group will have. So on the x-axis, you guys are seeing the predicted mortality by the model, and the y-axis here is the actual mortality of each group. So we trained on 3 years of data, and then we took about 72 groups of pigs that were recently placed in the nursery phase. They were just weaned. We ran the model, and 60 days later we came and validated if the model was right or not. So the R-square was not as high as when we did the training model, which was about 0.72. But if we, again, put that threshold of above 5% or below 5%, we can see here a high positive predicted value, which in my opinion says basically when the model said that the groups, they were gonna have mortality above 5%, 92% of the times the model was right. And we have a lot of opportunity here on the other hand, so we have a lot of, let's say, not a lot, but a lower number of negative predicted value. Which makes sense, because if these guys, everything goes right in the sow farm, and they have a low mortality predicted, but they have a lateral introduction of disease, the model it's not counting for that. So 92% for the positives, and we had 2 false positives here in this case. But those ones, they were not like predicted as 15, and it was 4. So I think that's kind of thinking about that Formula 1 concept. It's trying to use those tools that we have available today, machine learning models, to be more proactive and thinking about prospectively. Here's just classifying mortality patterns. Let's see my time. Just classifying mortality patterns. So we mentioned about mortality. Mortality is important. So we had 349 closeouts, 142, 1,000, 395. And here's the mortality for all these closeouts, so the average. What you guys can see here is that the black and the red lines, they have pretty much similar mortalities if we think about the overall closeout mortality. But the red one, even though it's smaller compared to the other one, the cost of that mortality per head is about $1 more, because we see here that mortality is happening later in the growing phase, not early like the black one here is happening. And we all know that late mortality costs you more because of feed consumption, right? But here is what actually putting the numbers out there for each group, including the information for the groups and the mortality, using an economic modeling behind the scenes to actually measure how much that costs per head under my reality. So what we basically here did is copy and paste a model that was developed by Lee Shows and Russ Eucken here at the IPIC and iState. And we paste that and translated that into programming in a way that we can calculate that for each group of pigs here. And at the end of the day, we go back to that question, for example, the E. coli example, and have a model also not only showing the mortality impact, but how much that costs in terms of dollars. So for example, 1.88 here in this example for the same groups. So take homes for this: strategic data surveillance, identification of at-risk groups through abnormal patterns of feed, water, temperature, medication, and cough. Like I mentioned, I think we have really good technology out there. A low-hanging fruit, it is this part of integration and making sure that we build this ecosystem so we can do this strategic data surveillance, the application of models with machine learning for mortality or average daily gain, depending on what's the priority of the system. And that allows you to take actions based on that integrated data. And I think here this causal impact is something that we need to apply more. So get rid of those pivot tables and what's the impact of E. coli based on my Excel spreadsheet, and try to control for other factors and use those models behind the scene. Those are more accurate than the other approach. And with that, if we have time for questions, I don't know if we have. Thank you.
We need it for the recording, though.
Hi, Edison.
Yep.
Hey, talking back on integrating all these KPIs, what we're doing right now, is it just this algorithm to kind of like project and you know, like make decisions, or is this like an app you guys are developing somewhere that we can integrate all, and it's just like a one-stop for getting information in, and then you know that's kind of like what I would like to see, a place where you can get alarms from your hog sites, a place where you can put in your mortality, your treatment, and all the information on going on the production side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, if I understood correctly, for a system, you mentioned the whole system. Yeah, so the goal when building these algorithms is actually building that platform that will deal with whatever they have and do that integration. So all these pre-weaning factors, they would follow all the way to the packing plant, but during the growing phase, you connect the feeder information, the temperature, different softwares. We know different companies with different softwares for each question, right? But we make sure we connect the coughing, the temperature, the water, all those things. But also, if you have an alert and the previous, let's say, the quality of those pigs when it was low, that already gives you an alert, you know? But if they had a really good performance and now you are having an increase in mortality, that's a different pattern. So we are trying to we are actually focusing on that integration, but the question, the way to investigate is actually understanding those patterns. Low or high weaning quality, and what's happening downstream in the growing phase, and the possible interactions related to health, production, and nutrition.
But there's not just one app.
No, that's system specific.
Okay.
Because if we go to a different company, it's totally different infrastructure. They have a different VDL, they have a different software. Their flows are different. They are not commingling, or they do double stock or not. So at this point, I wish we could have something that works for everyone, but I see this as more whatever the company have. We build the codes around their data as it is.
Quick question. Very interesting on prediction equations and machine learning. I'm more of any appetite to look into AI where you could interact with it. So, for example, hey, I get an alert that my sow mortality is creeping up. I type in and say, well, what can I do in the next 30 days or 60 days or whatever to prevent that or lower my sow mortality, and have it, based on all the data you put in there, it spits out, oh, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. That's a good point, and that's what we are focusing now. I don't have the results for this yet, but we know that the data that we have today, would have the information on those patterns, those interactions. So that's why I brought the smart guys here, the students from computer engineer, data science, to help us out on match forces here, right? The veterinarians, the animal scientists, and also engineers and computer science to build those, apply those AIs. Because in fact, I'm not a specialist on that, I'm a vet, so. Was hard to learn this, imagine AI, so.
All All right, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you.